Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yay.
Yeah, right.
Welcome back, everyone. This is That's What He Said, and this is a podcast about dating. Today I'm here with Alex Tenorio. Did I say that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Tenorio-Torres, technically.
Nice.
2 last names.
Love it. And I'm going to be interviewing him today. Our topic question is, why do men watch pornography? So we'll do just a really short introduction, and then we're just going to kind of jump right into it. So, Alex, you are a musician. I know that. You play guitar and...
Play guitar, sing, and then I'm very amateurish at drums. And then if you play guitar, you usually can play the bass.
Yeah.
And then I actually used to play the violin and the trumpet. Biggest regret in life is not continuing to play the violin because now it's one of my favorite instruments to listen to. And so I'm like, dang, I was too angsty for the violin and I really regret it now.
But you know strings, so...
Yeah, it's just,
I
forgot how to read sheet music. That's the problem, honestly. Okay. Yeah, so it's, but no, I guess like, you know, outside of, so I actually do have a bit of a plug. I actually have music on Spotify.
Okay.
So
awesome.
Yeah, Texas Turtles on Spotify. So check it out.
Texas Turtles. Yeah. Is it just Spotify, or do y'all have any social media?
I actually do have an Instagram for it.
Okay.
I think it's just like Texas Turtles Official. I think that's just all, I don't know. I never.
I'll tag it.
Yeah.
I'll tag yours and that one.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, that's no real like cool story behind like the name. It's just like, I think I live in Texas and turtles are kind of cool.
And you're from Canada.
Yeah, from Canada.
Originally. And how old are you?
I am 32.
32.
Yep.
And are you single? What's your status?
Single, and that's it.
And do you plan on getting married, or what's your goal?
Yeah, I would definitely like to get married, but I am a big proponent of Proverbs 69. Man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So, you know, I can have a plan in my heart of what I desire, and it's up to me to trust God to direct my steps in that. So I lean on that a lot, honestly. But it is a desire of mine, definitely to get married.
Yeah, and have a family.
Yeah, absolutely, and have the backyard, get the dog, get a little Rufus for myself, you know. And,
yeah, everybody needs a little Rufus.
Absolutely.
Just one, can't have more than one. Yeah, only child syndrome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I'll just ask you off the top, why do men watch pornography?
Yeah.
And sorry, let me preface this by saying, because not a lot of y'all, some of y'all like to flip the question around instead of just answering the question. So last week we had what's wrong with American men? And I got, what's wrong with American women? That's another question I would love to ask a foreign woman or somebody, you know, who can speak on the topic. But, so I'm not saying that women don't watch porn, but this is me interviewing a man and we want his perspective. So he's going to speak from a man's perspective.
Yeah.
So, just want to be clear on that. I'm not discounting that women do it too. We're going to talk about that. But that's just what the question is today. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to add on to that, I think, you know, whenever you get your female guests to come on here, you'll actually find that a lot of the reasons why men watch pornography also are found in women too as well. The reasons are actually pretty commonly held. It's just how it manifests in the different genders, right? That's why it looks so different. So why do men view pornography? I mean, in short, I would say it's 2 things, right? It's a satiation of what I would call a natural impulse. So like your sexual impulse, right? But that is intertwined oftentimes with different forms of trauma. And that's what doesn't get talked about a lot, strangely enough, right?
Okay.
So trauma actually plays a big role into why men view pornography. And the thing about that is that it's an unrealized trauma for a lot of not all the time, but for certain cases, right? And I'm going to speak very generally because there are always exceptions to every situation, right? Mm-hmm. But from what has been researched and what has been found is that really pornography is a symptom of a much deeper issue oftentimes in a man's life, right? And why I say unrealized trauma sometimes is because this is kind of where you get that avenue of men who perhaps don't think that there's anything wrong with it, right? because they haven't realized really the source of why they're doing it. So if it's not realized, they don't really assign any moral weight to it. So I would say that you know, it's definitely a satiation of a natural impulse that we as men have. We're sexually like driven, right? And I think that comes all the way back from the idea of reproduction, right? We
Yeah,
want to
of
reproduce.
course.
So, you know, like sex is a good thing. Sex is a beautiful thing that God made. You know, God talks about it in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, and so there's this sort of like negative stigma that actually exists a lot in religious circles of sex. I think we're finding that it's slowly kind of the layers are being unpeeled.
Yep.
But not everything that is done in sexual conduct is good. You know,
Right.
if that makes sense. So that's how I would say that.
So, going back to what you said about trauma, what are some examples of a trauma that a guy may have, whether he's aware of it or not, that would drive him to watch porn?
Yeah, and this one I would say is actually probably more prominent in religious circles, particularly in religiously like rigorous families. So I think there's a statistic out there that like they interviewed men who grew up in what they would categorize a very strict religious household, and 77% of those men went on to grow up and struggle with pornography.
Did it matter what kind of religion it was, or just religious in general?
I don't know if it mattered what kind of religion, but I'm assuming that due to where the source of the information came from, it was probably more talking about Christian households, right?
Okay.
But to answer your question though, one of the traumas that is unrealized is essentially it's when basically in these like families where it's very conservative, right, very very strict, there are clear boundaries drawn on where is the line between what is right and what is wrong sexually from a moral perspective, and that's a good thing to have. But the problem is when that line gets encroached or crossed on by a young boy or a young girl, the parent's response to that actually has a huge impact on their development of that psychologically. What do I mean by that?
You mean if the child is abused?
No, this is just talking about if, for example, little Johnny's on his, gets on the computer and, he starts exploring around and
Okay,
pulls up a
sees
porn
something,
site, right?
okay.
Sees something they shouldn't say, boom, gets caught. In these very like conservative, like kind of, and I'm using conservative not in a political sense, but just like very
Rigid, kind of.
rigid, yeah.
Okay.
There's kind of just like a slap in the hand, like no, that's kind of the response they get. And so what that does is that starts to develop this neurology, right? Starts to wire the kid's brain that, oh, anything sexual is bad, and they start to kind of build this apprehension to sexuality in general, right? In particular in the pursuit of it, right? But they're exposed to it every day too as well. So this creates confusion in the kid's mind, and then basically they grow up with an unhealthy relationship to proper sexual conduct. Rather than the parents stepping in and saying, hey, this is a good time for me to explain to you what is normal, what is natural sexual impulse, what is natural sex, what is and what isn't, right? Because when you just step in and say no, and you kind of bat someone's hand away, you basically categorize an entire sphere of life as negative, right?
Right.
And then there's probably not a follow-up conversation with the kid, right? And then they go into a public school, right? Or they go in, or and if that doesn't get corrected, I mean, we're seeing now like the age of exposure of pornography to these kids is, I mean, it used to be in like middle school and like now we're talking about like elementary school, right?
Yeah.
So
I'll have some stats that I'm going to read throughout the episode, but just because you brought that one up, the average age of exposure for men is 12 years old.
yeah.
1 in 3 kids see hardcore porn by the age of 12. 57% of teens search out porn monthly, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely crazy, and it's sad because, I believe that at that age, a kid should just be experiencing innocence, and it's really unfortunate because oftentimes the question is not so much if a kid's gonna watch porn, but it's when they're gonna watch porn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
But we see through, I think through that initial answer to the question of like, where does this unseen trauma come from? Why that one's an unseen trauma is because that's something that doesn't need to get necessarily resolved in a kid's growth for them to continue progressing normally per se, right? But over time, if they don't start to develop, if they don't have someone who's older to help mediate that relationship between, you know, what is okay sexually and what is not, right? And explain a little bit more what they saw, then that over time produces just that unhealthy relationship with just the idea of sexuality, and then that leads to a myriad of problems, right? So, and I mean, you know, we can, probably not the point of this one, but you know, we can probably imagine where that leads to, right? So,
yeah.
So I would say that's one of the I think blind spots that we have, honestly, in today's society when it comes to viewing like the idea of like pornography, because you know, I don't, and this is just anecdotal here, I have really not met a man in my life that started viewing pornography late in their life. It all started at the age of youth, right? And so that's also where I think we have an opportunity to address the situation, right? Because it is something that I think, and it's not taking a moral stance on here that I am trying to vilify someone who's seen it, but just from what we've seen clinically and neurologically, it's not something that is good for a person at that age, and it has impacts down the road.
And I'm sure there are, well, I don't know about children, but there are people who view porn as a good thing.
Right.
I would definitely say that they are the minority,
Yes.
by far. Even people who do it or have done it will say that it's not good.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that everyone thinks it's bad. If you're an advocate for porn, I would love to have this conversation with you as well. Those people aren't just like out and about, like screaming it from the rooftops, but you know, send a DM or whatever.
And I think there's a reason why there's not a large visible advocacy group for it, right? Because it's look, like I'll just speak from a general man's perspective, and this would be the question that I would pose on the audience, and particularly for the men in the group, is that in describing the fruits of the relationship with you and your girlfriend or your wife or your fiance, would you say porn is a component that positively describes your relationship? You know? I don't think most men are going to say yes to that. And I could be wrong, right? And I would say even if there are some, I don't think the exception makes a good logic for the rule at the end of the day. So, but anyway, maybe I'm jumping around here.
Everything you're saying is really good. So I want to sort of like paint the picture. You know, a big objective on the show is for women, especially, to get the male, to pick your brain, to get the male perspective on things that we don't or can't understand.
Yeah.
So can you kind of explain, like, what is the male experience when you're watching porn? Maybe for the first time, maybe not, maybe the 100th time, but what is it that's happening mentally, emotionally, physiologically that makes it so alluring?
Yeah. Well, I can speak to it from like a practical sense, and then there's obviously the chemical side of it, right? So maybe I'll start with just like the practical sense. Practically speaking, right, when a man views porn, it's, hey, I want to get off.
Yeah.
Like, quite honestly, it's like, I've had a rough day. You know, I am tired. I am bored. I am sad. I am feeling these emotions, right? And I am not finding the release. But I know that I can go to my phone or my computer and I can just close the doors or do whatever I need to in my own privacy in my home, and I can release that, right? I can essentially, right? You know, you have
That's like a stress relief type of.
Yeah, you're essentially addressing, you know, an emotional response at the end of the day, I think, and I don't want to make that like overly complicated, right? Because I'm not talking about like your sadness necessarily, but like you might be hungry,
Okay.
and be like, I am hungry, and you know, like, but like for some reason I feel rather horny today. I don't know, like, I mean, like
That's definitely a male experience. When women are hungry, feed us food. We want food as fast as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's kind of crazy, like, and you start identifying these triggers, right? Because every man has their unique set of triggers, absolutely. But like the reason why you will go as a man emotionally to view porn is because something has triggered you emotionally to get there, you know, and I think you know that you can start to develop and build that as a habit, right? So I would say, like, from an emotional standpoint, you know, that's what's going on in a man's head, right? We're trying to address some sort of, and I mean, the emotion can be sexual. It's like, hey, I just look. Testosterone in a man, right, is the chemical that regulates like how sexually active we want to be, right?
Part of it,
yeah, you might have just decided like, hey, or not decided, but like you might be like, hey, today I'm just feeling a little bit more active than usual, and like I really just need to act out on that. And well, I'm also single, so well, I guess the only other option I have is go do my thing and wherever.
Okay, so I want to pause right there, because would you say that porn is necessary for a guy to masturbate? Do you, if you're wanting that release, sounds like you're describing it kind of as like a release, a stress reliever, something to like take the edge off.
Yeah.
Aside from when it's maybe just an urge.
Yeah.
Do you need porn to do that?
Well, we have to define what pornography is too.
Do you need to look at anything?
No, you don't.
Okay.
No. You know, you talk to the general male population and they don't need a visual necessarily. But the visual that they have, though, can come from their own mind too.
Sure.
You know, but oftentimes that's that part of, you know, relying on that comes after you've already consumed of a lot of visual pornography leading up to that, right? I had a mentor a while back ago, and he called it like you're building up your imagery bank in your mind, right? You're building up these things. You can go back and recall it, right? You can remember it, and so
now, just devil's advocate. What if you've never looked at porn? You're still going to have those urges and those feelings. Can you not resort to images of maybe physical interactions?
I think that we live in a culture where, realistically speaking, that scenario does not exist.
Really? Why do you say that?
Because pornography is, and I'm not saying this again from a moral, I'm just merely objective perspective, right?
Right.
You look at the shows that you see on Netflix, or you look at the movies, or, you know, the ads that we have nowadays, or even Instagram, right? Or like all these, or, you know, how people nowadays dress on TV even, right? Modesty is kind of something that's been thrown to the side in this country. And I'm not, again, not a moral indictment. I'm just saying, objectively speaking, you know, you go to a
this is not the Middle East.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right?
I'd probably get beheaded for wearing a crop top in some countries.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think that every man has been exposed to pornography. I don't think you'll find someone that has not been exposed to pornography. The question is, now, is the man actively seeking it, right? And I would say, no, a man doesn't need to be actively seeking pornography to conjure up what it is, right?
Okay.
But simply in the movies that we watch or in the shows that we do, I mean, and this is, by the way, this is pre-AI. Now, AI is a whole nother thing, but we're talking pre-AI.
Right, yeah.
But
we're
anyway,
talking millennials.
I know, right?
All of us are like, what is this?
We're just thinking, oh man, Terminator is going to be a real thing. We're going to be in a shootout or iRobot.
Yeah, we're already in the Matrix. We're just
basically
one more step away from.
I actually watched, this is really embarrassing. I had never watched those movies before.
Really?
I watched them like a couple weeks ago and I was like, dang, these are like way ahead of their time.
Right? It's kind of weird. I haven't watched them in a long time.
Yeah.
I should rewatch them, but
yeah. But there were pornographic scenes in that movie.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, of like the world that we live in now, you're going to have seen pornographic images
Right.
one way or another. I mean, I even feel like my exposure to that kind of stuff was way too early from like watching the Titanic.
Yeah.
Like, I remember exactly where I was when my parents let me watch Titanic for the first time, and I was no older than 5.
Oh.
So, and that's not even that graphic.
No.
So, that to me, I wouldn't even today let my kid do that.
Yeah.
And that's nothing compared to what we're talking about or what exists now, as far as like the graphicness of the content.
Yeah.
So what is it, you kind of described like the experience, but what is it about porn that is so alluring? Because I mean, the general population knows that it's something that people can be addicted to relatively easily, I think. And it's a pretty intense addiction.
Yeah.
So what would you say, and I know you're not a porn addict, I'm not saying that, but what would you say just from the male's point of view makes it so alluring?
Yeah. No, that is a great question. So I think, again, my personal take on it, it's the fact that for a man, just holistically speaking, for men, we crave control. We do. And not in a dominating fashion.
That literally made me like a little bit fiery mad inside.
Well,
I don't know why, but it's like just my instant reaction was
Yeah.
like, why do you want to control me?
And not talking about people, right? But
Yeah,
control a
I
situation. And because we want to be able to, this is kind of where the provision kind of comes in. The more we feel like we can control, the more we feel like we can provide well, right? But we can only control as much as how we can provide, right? So it's like a sort of a dynamic between that. We have that view with porn, right? We feel that we can be in control of that, and that there are no measurable repercussions for it, right? Tangibly speaking, right? Let's take like alcohol for example, right? Okay, so like if I were to say, all right, I'm gonna kill the rest of that bottle of whiskey tonight, and I'm just gonna binge, and I guarantee you,
You're gonna be sleeping in the yard.
Oh yeah, and I am not making it to work tomorrow, and I'm getting fired, right? Okay.
Yeah.
If I go on a binger and just watch porn for like 4 hours, I'll wake up tomorrow without a hangover. Wake up tomorrow, be able to go to work and do whatever I need to do. And guess what? I don't need to tell a single person because no one is going to know. Unless you go into my internet history, and guess what? There's incognito mode and there's all sorts of stuff. So it's something that can be really swept under the rug. It's something that we feel like we can control as men, and we don't see repercussions to it. We really don't, because they're not immediate. But long term there definitely are. So that's why that I guess, I don't know if that answered kind of.
Yeah, it does. When you say you feel like you can control it, what does that mean? What are you controlling?
You are controlling your access and your presence to it, I guess, if that makes sense, right?
Okay.
So I know exactly, okay, alcohol, again, example. Liquor stores close at a certain time. Beer gets stopped sold at a certain time, right? Okay, food, right? Food, because why I bring these things up is because here's kind of the sort of thing I want to kind of unveil in this conversation, is that there are other things that we medicate with seemingly normal things too as well, right?
Right.
And again, that's part of the human nature. But I think this is kind of where porn differs from the rest, is that the access is so freely given. The stigma is completely lifted from culture, like the culture, because no one talks about it, right? It's the dirty secret in culture that no one wants to talk about, and if we talk about it, we all kind of laugh about it, and we don't want to put any weight on it, because the moment we put weight on it for one person, chances are you got to put weight on it for yourself too.
Sure.
So the control aspect really comes down to 24.
It's also, hold that thought, just because I want to like speak a little bit of truth. It seems to be a secret.
Yes.
The truth always comes out.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
So it reminds me of, I was watching the Ashley Madison documentary. It's on Netflix. Do you remember that website? When I
think I
was
remember-
watching it, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this. Because it was like early 2000s. It was a
Yeah.
website that people went to, like a dating website for married people who wanted to have affairs.
Yeah.
And it was the big thing when you said a secret, because I just watched it, is like that they'll keep your secrets. Everything was supposed to be
Right.
very confidential.
Right.
And someone hacked them and released everything to the public. I mean, it was on the Today Show, it was very public.
Yeah.
And so it just reminded me that that's also a lie, that it's a secret, because it might be a secret for a while, but it'll come out at some point, whether it's from your own doing or someone finding something, or it just, the truth has a way of coming out. So
Yeah. And, from my personal framework as a Christian, right? Like, there is no action without a repercussion. That's biblically sound. And the thing is that the danger with pornography is that you sometimes don't realize that until it's too late. And what I mean by that is that, going back to the science for a little bit, neurologically, what is going on to when you're viewing porn? You are hyper stimulating your flow of the component in your brain that seeks out satiate. So there's two parts of your brain that sort of deal with pleasure. There's one that seeks out the appetite, but then that's separate from satisfaction.
okay.
So appetite, you're feeding an appetite, but you're never satisfied. That's what porn is, right?
Wow.
Because the way that you're satisfied is through physical means, literal physical touch. That's the way that our brain is wired. For that part of your brain to be activated, it's the literal act of sex. But what pornography does is that it just plays with that first part of appetite, and it never responds with the true satiation. And this is, again, this is all studied and shown in science, and so we were simply not designed to be this way at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Plainly speaking, right?
Yeah.
So.
And so, going back to where I cut you off about the control, you were saying you feel like you can control the access.
Yeah.
Maybe even because now you can search for whatever you want. You can feel like you can, in a sense, control what you're getting.
Yeah.
Would you say that you also feel like you can control women?
That's a good question. I think you don't necessarily feel like you can control women, but you rather walk into an encounter with a woman with a preconceived expectation of how they're going to react. And again, that's all been programmed in your brain by the way that you view sex play out on pornography.
Right.
Right? Like you think, oh, sex with this person is going to go this way, and it's going to feel this way, and it's going to act out this way. It's going to go for this length of time. She's going to react in this way when I do this. Like, you are literally transposing a fake individual on a real person. So I don't think you walk into it from saying that I'm controlling that person, but there can be a lot of disappointment when it's like, oh, that only lasted 30 seconds. Oh, other things.
She didn't do what I wanted her to do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where it's like, that's damaging to the relationship, because that's the beginning of the decay of sexual attraction with one another.
Yeah.
So and I would say in extreme cases, right, where we see, people who have gone way too far with this, and there's a lot of other things that go along with it, right? But when it gets to the point of it translates to abuse, right, or it translates to these situations that are horrifying. I mean, you go watch any documentary on these serial killers, a lot of them view porn.
Oh yeah.
And we're binging it, right? Not even like how the normal person views it, like to the extent. So, and again, I am not saying that if you view porn, you can be a serial killer. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that it keeps you longer than you want to stay, and it's going to bring out more from you than you want to release.
Yeah.
And that's the danger with sexual drive. Sexual drive is our most powerful drive, humanly speaking. So it's it's one that it's like, why are we toying around with it? You know,
Yeah.
we should educate ourselves on what is proper conduct with it, so we can altogether have a better fabric. And then at the same time, it's like, then you actually get to know the individual, right? That you're pursuing them, and you don't think they're going to be like the person that I saw on the internet 4 days ago. It's like, no, they're their own person. They have their own set of emotions. They also have their own set of desires, right? And it's, and that's part of the fun of the relationship is you get to go on a journey with that individual and discover
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. So on that note, how does watching porn and acting out in that way, how does that compare to having sex with a real person?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just you described like that experience that a man is having online. What's the comparison to a real person? Because I've always heard from any guy friend or any guy I've ever talked to, they would always prefer a real person.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of a catch-22 to me, because it's like, okay, well, if that's true, why are you guys all doing this?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of answers as to why, but just kind of explain the difference between the two experiences.
So I think it goes back to what you're talking about, control, because that is one thing we can control as men. The difference between real sex and pornography is that you get to dictate the terms as to when you want to be satisfied. In a real relationship with sex, that's not the case, right? You have situations where, look, like, we live busy lives. Like, sometimes, like, at the end of the day, you're just tired and just want to go to bed.
Yeah, there's a lot of external factors.
Yeah. So how that compares, it's to put it in a very just simple way, is you're building up a utopia in your mind, right? Of like, you're building the ideal, and and the more you're spending time in the ideal, you're disconnecting yourself from reality, right?
Right.
But then you still have to step back into reality at the end of the day.
You should. I guess technically you don't have to. But
well, yeah, we're going to talk about AI here. You don't have to, right? But the thing is that chemically speaking, the length of time that the chemicals in your brain that crave sexual desire, right? The more and more you excite that consistently, testosterone has a very low, or has a very slow like half-life, I think is what they call it, like decay basically. So the more and more you're constantly exciting that, the more and more you're hyper stimulating yourself in the real world, which if your partner's not keeping up on that, right, which they won't, right, because, well, women's brains are wired than men's brains, and they just don't pursue it the
and
same
you're
way.
like, you're almost like stimulating that at like a unrealistic pace.
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
unrealistic
I remember
frequency.
I remember there was an older couple one time that was like, oh yeah, I remember when I got married in my 20s, and they were like, I was like, yeah, I was gonna have sex every day, and he was like, yeah, give it about a month, and like, you'll realize that is just not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be, it's
No.
not meant to be, because this is the thing about pornography, is that it robs you of real emotional intimacy. I mean, pornography, okay, this was a question that I was asked a long time ago by my mentor, was like, what is it that you're seeking? And the answer to that was, ultimately came down to relation. So there's something in neuroscience that's called earned secured attachment, and that's played out in a positive relationship with someone. In other words, when you
Healthy relationship.
yeah. And what but that in particular comes when the person is heard and is felt seen and feels like their story matters to the person that's telling it, right?
Right. Safety.
Right? Pornography essentially puts on a facade of that, but doesn't actually deliver that at the end of the day. So a person begins to develop a false secured attachment to a situation that they're pursuing, right? Porn plays out these scenes, right? There's acting, there's all this stuff. And what that person is doing is that they're attaching themselves to that environment, and like putting themselves into that. But at the end of the day, you have to step out of that, you know,
Yeah.
as of right now.
Right.
And you go, again, interact with your partner, and you have those expectations because chemically you're still coming down from that. And it's like, you know, she doesn't want to engage, or he doesn't want to engage, right? In this case, for a man, she doesn't want to engage. And it's like, well, like, but like, this is the scene and this is how it should play out. And it warps
It's a
your
false
reality.
expectation.
It really does.
So I heard something the other day, I think it was on another podcast. They were just talking about like the neural connections that you make. So just like with any addiction or anything that's pleasurable or stimulating, you're creating a neuro pathway.
Yes.
And you're creating some neurofeedback in your brain where you're going to that stimulus. It's like you said, it's like you're pushing a button. Every time you push the button, it's giving you what you want. Just like a dog or a rat, they're going to keep going back. There's like all kinds of studies about that, where like rats push a button and they get cocaine, and then they keep going back more and more and more often. Just like if you're laying in a hospital bed and they're giving you Vicodin and you've got the little button, you're going to start doing it more and more frequently. So you're creating this neural pathway that's making you connected to the porn the way that you're supposed to be connected to your spouse. So you have taken the neural pathway that God created for you to be emotionally, intimately, divinely connected to another person, and only one person, in my opinion. And you're instead using that to be connected to porn, which is not even real. I mean, you can, they're real people, but they're not even, if you were there physically in the room, you would realize that it's fake. So it's a complete degradation of something that's supposed to be really, really, really good. There was a study in 2014 that found that compulsive porn users had greater impairments of sexual arousal and erectile difficulties in intimate relationships. So because you're feeding this neuro pathway, when you go to engage in that in real life, especially as a man, you have difficulty even being able to enjoy it. Because that neuro connection is like dead. You have like basically amputated that part of yourself mentally. So it's no wonder it's destroying relationships.
I would say, like, to the listeners, like, you don't take my word for these. Like, these stats are readily available, you know.
They are. And to be honest, I was looking for statistics to, like, go along with my questions, and I was really digging for positive statistics. And they just don't exist.
They don't.
There's like nothing out there that says like it's good for you, it's good for your health, it's good for your family. Like there's nothing out there statistically. Now there may be people who say it's good for their relationship or whatever, but that's not what the data shows.
Can I also make a point going back to, I talked about trauma earlier on in the show, and you talked about, you brought up, was it sexual abuse? And I said I steered away from that, but I do want to go back to address that real quick, because there is data showing there's a link definitely between sexual abuse and the use of pornography, right? The sad part about that statistic for men in particular is that men are most likely to get abused at the youngest age possible, because that's when they're the most vulnerable, right? And here's the other part of it, is that the younger the abuse happens, the lower rate it is to be reported. Just in general, like, child sexual abuse statistics are very up in the air, right? So
because you don't know what's really being reported.
So I would say, like, if you're, look, at the end of the day, it was put well this way, that because whenever you start talking about abuse, that's a very difficult subject. I'd rather not get into that, but there's two ways to view it at the end of the day. There's your trauma can be viewed as an opportunity to recover from it, right? And that's, I would say, like, you can break out, you can break forward. or you can be stuck in it, right? And that's where I would encourage, like, if there's someone who that is the reason why they're struggling with porn, they need to seek help. They need to go to therapy. They need to go to a counselor. And if they're married to someone, I would encourage the spouse to be very tender and compassionate and listening to hearing that, because that's a very difficult thing for someone, even in a marriage, to unpack with someone. But
Yeah.
that was one of the things that when I was researching this, shocked me and saddened me at the same time, right? Because men, I think, also are not very likely to speak out on that, you know. And
the
again,
abuse.
again, I am not. I will never be an advocate for making an excuse to, oh, for this reason you should go on and doing, you know, what you're doing. No, but I merely bring that to a point to, again, address the fact that the reason why someone views porn isn't always as simple as he's just a horny dude, right?
Right.
Like there are stories with individuals that need to be addressed and pulled back on. And here's the thing, like, when you're getting to know someone in a dating environment, that may not come up until way down the road, right? So I think
Right.
that's where, you know, it's incumbent on the partner to be able to show a lot of grace there and understanding. But at the same time, you know, until there's a ring on the finger, right? If that's something that you also do not feel like you want to deal with, you know, don't feel like you owe it to that person to carry that with them.
Yeah.
But when you marry that person, you are committing to carrying that with them, because two become one. And their trauma now becomes your trauma, right? And likewise, your trauma becomes their trauma. So that's the beautiful juxtaposition of marriage, but it's one that carries a lot of weight to it. And I would
For sure.
encourage, like, people, weigh who you're gonna marry. Like, really think about what you're inheriting. And
Right.
there's nothing wrong with waiting for the right individual. And we live in a culture that rushes that decision, and marriage is a capstone on your life. That it's like, that is it. That is what you're aiming for. Marriage used to be a milestone. We got married. Cool. There's so much of life left to be lived.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, you know, don't
Yeah.
rush into that.
For sure. Yeah, 56% of divorce cases in the US involved one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. So, is watching porn when you're married cheating?
Yes, I would say it is. But again, I have a Christian framework. In the Gospels, Jesus very clearly talks about the lusting of a woman who is not your wife is adultery, and adultery is cheating, right? But I will say this, okay, if you're not a Christian, right, how do you address this issue, right?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, well, ask your partner. Start off asking your partner, are like, hey, so how do you feel about the fact that I would go spend, I don't know, like, at around like 9 p.m., I'm just going to go into the bathroom for like 15 minutes and do my thing, but then I'll come out and be here. It's like, I would say that you are not being true to marriage, right? And I'm talking about a marriage perspective, but I would even say, even in dating, I would say it's the same thing, because I define dating in two ways: intentionality and exclusivity, right? So you need to be intentional about.
Well, you might be the minority in that. Simple concept.
Intentionality.
Often not believed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so exclusivity, right? It's like, well, are you okay, like, telling your partner, like, hey, by the way, I viewed porn last night? Probably not, right? Why? Because there's shame. Why is there shame? Well, because that is what I would call emotional cheating. Because you're not emotionally invested 100%. You're actually only emotionally invested 70% or 60%, because going back to why men view porn, we're satiating an emotion. We're satiating an emotion somewhere else here, right? That it's like, it's not a healthy thing for the relationship. So, but in that case, you're satiating sexually. And I would say that there's no difference there at that point between satiating sexually with something virtual versus having a side chick that you're texting
Right.
you get the emotional connection from, right? It's all the same thing at the end of the
So
day.
from the woman's standpoint, if your boyfriend that you're having sex with or your husband is doing that and you find out, I can speak for myself. The thing that hurts the most about that is why did he think he had to go to porn to get something that he could have gotten from me? Now, unless he's attracted to other men or animals, like it's literally something that you can't provide,
Right.
which probably is not most of the time the case. That's the part that I get the most confused about. It's one thing when you're talking about a single guy who's alone,
Yes.
but to do it in a relationship, why do you think guys continue to watch porn when they're in a relationship and they have access to real sex, which we've clearly stated is better than porn?
Yeah.
So why do it?
Yeah. So I think that falls in the category of the Romans 1 verse that speaks to a debased mind, right? Like porn starts to debase your mind. It starts to dishelve the things that should and shouldn't be, right? And you don't act rationally anymore to your partner because what you said is like, yeah, the rational answer is like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like you're a real physical human being here who can provide that satisfaction, but you're going to something that's not even real, right? But isn't that the general problem with what I would say just sin offers, right? It offers a false reality that only ends in disappointment. So, you know, it's why a man does it. I don't know if there's a general coverall blanket statement, right? I think you know, each man can probably answer that individually, but I would say it goes back to the fact that it's like they are pursuing a medication of something that they're not getting. And here's the problem. Part of how you grow emotional intimacy is that you are vulnerable with your partner and you communicate that.
Yeah.
You say, hey, like, I am missing this from the relationship. I want to figure this out together.
Yeah.
Rather, the man is saying, I don't even want to hear what you're saying. I already know how I'm going to resolve this on myself, and worse off, you're not included in that conversation. I think that's what a man ultimately does when he views porn in a relationship. Is he actually like cuts you off completely, and that is like, this is my own little kingdom, and I'm going to do what I want over here. But when I've, you know, and here's the thing, I'm going to keep this around in our relationship, right? Unless it comes out. And then when it comes out, well, then he's got to answer for that, right?
Right.
So I think...
And then even when it comes out, there are going to be a lot of women who would rather pretend to be okay with it or convince themselves that they're okay with it rather than him, whatever the consequence may be, him leave the marriage, him get angry, him then go have an affair. Like, I think a lot of women, because it's such a sensitive thing, they would rather just say, okay, well, these are the ground rules, do whatever you want inside those ground rules, which I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
I think the assumption when a woman finds out that a guy is doing that is that there's something that he wants sexually that he doesn't want to say.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a wrong assumption, but I would say for most women that would be like the first assumption that you would jump to.
Like they can't, like there's something sexually missing in their dynamic, kind of?
Aside from like not having it at all, like let's say they're a very sexually active couple.
Yeah.
But there's something else that he wants, maybe something weird that he doesn't want to say.
Yeah.
And what do you think is the reason for that? Why a man might not want to tell his partner what he wants, or like something he wants to try, or some like weird kink, whether they're married or not?
Yeah.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that would be a big reason that a lot of men inside a relationship would turn to porn.
Yeah. So I can't speak from experience on that. I will just say that generally speaking, I think a reason why that would happen is because, again, that assumption that that there is something sexually missing is missing the mark, you know, because everything that I've understood and personally have seen in my own life too of what attracts a man to porn really has nothing to do with being sexually satisfied with a partner that you love. It really doesn't. It's a form of medication. There is something else going on in that person's life that for whatever reason they're not letting you in on that, right? And that touches on vulnerability.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that the man is a victim of that and he's justified in acting out this way, because I think that's wrong. I think that the integrous man understands that he has to love his wife like Christ loved the church. And that means being sacrificial. And sacrifice and vulnerability come hand in hand. So he needs to understand that, hey, like, I am going to lay out these deep insecurities. They might be sexual in nature, but they might not be. This is why this is a very difficult thing to unpack, because you also go back to unrealized trauma. Because if you confront him, he might be like, I don't know.
I don't know why I'm doing it.
And let me tell you that when I was, years ago, when I was talking with my mentor about this, he would ask me the same question: Alex, why do you do this? And I would say, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. So it sometimes takes years to uncover why you're really doing it. But there is a reason. I always like there's a black and white at the end of the day, but you got to go through a lot of gray to get there, you know. And so I think that's
I like that.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the gist of it. And this is the rosy, the non-rosy picture of marriage that they don't paint for you. Is
That's
that
right.
if you say till death do us part, like that means you're tethered to that person through all that gray.
Yeah.
And that gray may take decades to go through.
So what's the best, what is the best way for a woman to react to finding out that her boyfriend or her husband has been watching porn?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, I would encourage, if that person's a Christian, and she's a Christian woman, I would encourage you to go read the book of Job. And pay attention
not
to
one I usually pick
yeah,
out.
it's not one that anyone likes to pick out, to be honest.
It's not Job either. It's Job.
It's Job, right? And the reason why I bring that up is like I have been through with my church. We've been going through the book of Job, right?
Okay.
I've been learning a lot on how not to be a miserable comforter, right?
A miserable comforter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What does that mean?
What that means is that you need to create the space for the person to just speak and just to let them lay out all their cards on the table without interruption. Even if you think you have the right answer in the immediate moment, you need to wait until that person has left everything out on the table. And then what you do is that you don't take the cards that they laid out on the table and you throw it back in their face. You say, okay, you've laid out your problems. You've laid out your brokenness here. You've laid out your guilt, your shame, your moral failings, right? How can we piece this up together? Because it has to be a together thing. From friends that I've talked to in the past that are now married to their wives, they had a moment of vulnerability when they addressed this with their partners. They said, hey,
Were they dating?
I don't recall. But what I remember is that there was a certain point when it was going to get serious.
Okay.
And there was a conversation had between them when he opened up and said, hey, I want to let you know, this has been a struggle in my life. Her response was to be his biggest support to get out of it. But here's the thing, that only works if the man is willing to put in the work to get out of it himself. Because it's not fair on the woman to believe a false promise that he delivers.
Right.
Or doesn't deliver, right? So that's I would say, like, what we're looking for as a man, if we're trying to get out of that at the end of the day, if we're trying to come to you, is that we're looking to be for this vulnerability to be received by grace first before correction.
Okay.
We want you to understand where we're coming from. We want to be able to unpack, and we also want you to understand that we may not have in the immediate moment an answer to every single question that you may have about it. But a good man is going to promise you that he's going to find out, because at the end of the day, this issue, if he really loves you, is an obstacle between his pursuit of you and what's stopping him from getting there.
Yeah.
And so if he sees that his porn addiction is something that is going to potentially result in him losing you, and he really loves you, I mean, I'm speaking very broadly. I'm not an addiction expert, right?
Sure.
I'm sure that there's people who may disagree with that statement, but because, we see how addiction also can be really destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also a firm believer that unrelenting love, it really can break through like anything, right? So, but if you're in that situation, there's no shame either in seeking out professional help together.
Yeah.
Therapy, I think that's the other problem, is that this is kind of something that a lot of men are starting to realize, like, I actually need to go to therapy for this. I actually need to go get professional help for this, right? I actually need to.
There's the Covenant Eyes.
I have that on my phone.
Really? I think I realized what it was when I was doing all this research.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of like statistics on their website and stuff. So, in your opinion, how is porn use affecting the dating culture, if at all?
So it's so this whole idea again of like talking about, hey, you have your own little kingdom here where you're satisfying your emotional cravings, right? I mentioned like singleness was one of them. There is a definite relationship in isolation and pornography use. There's a lack of willingness to pursue women because the more you insulate yourself in that bubble, you also start losing your touch with reality of how women generally are. You're not as good to communicate with them anymore. You don't know how to speak to women. Those things can start going. I'm not saying every time, but like they can certainly start going to the side. And the most difficult part too is learning how to respect physical boundaries during a dating relationship. That gets really severed too.
There was a stat that 51% of millennials say porn is bad for society. That's kind of what I was thinking with that question, is I feel like it has to be partly to blame for this lack of pursuit that we see in men right now in dating. It's so clear that there's so much less effort, so much less of a desire to pursue women like in real life, in person. And I can only assume that's partly to blame because of porn. We kind of talked about that on the episode about the internet. Because where, let's say, pre-social media, pre-Pornhub, like all of that, a guy might be out and about, meet a girl, talk to her, and then if she's really beautiful or he's lusting after her or whatever, he goes home and he's like, man, and wants to talk to her again because he's chasing that, whether it's just a physical connection or whether then he starts to really like her and just chasing her in general.
Yeah.
But now I feel like it's like this one night entertainment of like, if I meet someone and she's hot and we hit it off and we flirt, blah, 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 maybe get her number, maybe follow her on Instagram, but then I can go home and watch porn and satisfy all of that. I can just, nip it in the bud that night. Then the next day, why you're not even going to think about her again.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of, you rev up the engines and you can go home and, but dating culture also today has a very big problem with instant gratification, right? Like, I have to find the right person and I already need to be 10 steps into a relationship. The first 10 steps already need to be guaranteed, and I don't want to put any work to take those first 10 steps.
Right, or exercise patience.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where I think, like, it's, the fact that our dating culture does not encourage, virginity. The fact that our dating culture encourages hookup, shack up, breakup culture, right? I mean, like, those things are detrimental to dating, for sure.
Assuming that you're dating to get married.
Right, yeah. And I would even say, if you're not, Well, okay, that's an interesting one. What other reason would you date to, aside from just dating because you're
For fun.
for fun?
Yeah, I mean, there's people who definitely date for fun or
Serial
for
daters?
like, yeah, oh yeah, or for a long-term relationship. But
Yeah.
there are people who don't believe in marriage. I mean, look at people that you may know that just live together for
Right.
years and years and years and never get married.
Yeah.
All statistics also show that that doesn't work out most of the time. If you cohabitate before marriage, you're more likely to get divorced. So we talked earlier about how like men, people in general, are being exposed to porn much earlier on
Yeah.
or very early in life. Do you think that there's an appropriate age to, I mean, we live in a world where you're going to see that kind of content, whether it be in a movie or whatever, like we mentioned earlier, or you
Yeah.
have an Instagram. What do you think is like an appropriate age for a man to be exposed to at least that, if not actual porn?
Yeah. I would sort of cop out and say there's no appropriate age, but perhaps I would rephrase the question is at what age is it least detrimental for someone to get exposed to porn? And I would say the older you are. If you're someone in your like 40s or 50s and that's the first time you're viewing porn, it's probably going to be a lot less damaging on you than if you're someone who is like, 8 or 9, right?
Right.
So for a kid, I would say that there's never an appropriate time to expose them to pornography, but there absolutely is a responsibility on the parents to address what are sexual boundaries and how are they looked at in a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
That is something that I think it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have. I understand that, but I think it's an important one to have because
Especially, I think, from a father to a son.
yes, yeah, and from a father to a son, you see not just like what is normal sexually, but it's more noble than that. It's how do you love a woman? Like that is what a father should teach their son, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you love them beyond just physically, but how do you love them emotionally? How do you love them in a presence standpoint of view? How do you quote Bryan Adams, really really love a woman? Like that's kind of like what a man should, and in that it also encompasses respect, encompasses leadership, encompasses all sorts of different things that go into loving a woman well, honestly, right? So that's what's incumbent on the parents to address, but going back to kind of what I was saying earlier, it's important also to the parent to know what the appropriate response is when their kid is exposed to that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, we're also in an age now where we have the internet, we have research, we have all these studies that are being done, and it's being made accessible to everyone. But these traumas have gone back generations. So sometimes to give our parents some slack here, sometimes they went through these traumas that were seriously downplayed and they never recovered from it. And then they had kids, and then they're like, well, because I never had to deal with this as a trauma, because it was never categorized that way, I'm just whatever, just deal with it, or just these are those yes and no, and no explanation, just because I told you so.
Right.
And we're finding out that in particular in this, if that response worked, then the super rigid religious household would have a statistic of 0% of men dealing with that.
Yeah.
But it's at 77%. So clearly
Wow.
that doesn't work. And so there needs to be an explanation behind it. Definitely.
On the point of talking about being exposed at a young age, I want to play this clip of Billie Eilish that I found earlier today. Let's just listen to it.
And I used to watch a lot of porn, to be honest. I started watching porn when I was like 11. I thought that's how you learned how to have sex. I was watching abusive porn, to be honest, when I was like 14. And I thought I was one of the guys and would talk about it and think it was really cool for not having a problem with it and not seeing why it was bad. And I think it really destroyed my brain. And I feel incredibly devastated that I was exposed to so much porn. I think that I had like sleep paralysis and these like almost like night terror / just nightmares because of it. I think that's how they started, because I would just watch abusive BDSM. I couldn't watch anything else, like, unless it was violent. I like didn't think it was attractive, and was a virgin. I had never done anything, and so it led to problems where, the first few times I, had sex, I was not saying no to things that were not good, and it's because I thought that that's what I was supposed to be attracted to. And I'm so angry that porn is so loved. The way that like vaginas look in porn is fucking crazy. No vaginas look like that. Women's bodies don't look like that. We don't come like that. We don't fucking enjoy things that are what it looks like people are enjoying. And it's how so many people think that they're supposed to learn. It's how so many men think that they're supposed to be. And because in porn there's no consent, like getting thrown around during sex, if you're not interested in being slapped and being choked, people are like, you're vanilla, you're soft, you're boring in bed. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about women. Women are like, oh, I have to like being hurt to be thought of as good in bed.
Makes me so, like, that just makes me
When
like
she
want to
said
cry.
that she's angry that porn is so loved, I mean,
She said she was devastated.
yeah.
Devastated that she was exposed at such a young age.
Yeah, and that's what she said about, I think I saw a statistic that like it's well over 50% of porn that is viewed is some sort of abusive, and I think physically is a higher percentage than verbally abusive. Mm-hmm. That was a shocking statistic to me that I was like, that's sad.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. But then, you wonder like, well, why are there marital spats or like these abuse situations that all of a sudden arise out of nowhere? And it's like, well, like when you've just been feeding that into your mind day after day and you pursue that.
Right.
And then,
and you learn, like what she was explaining, especially from a young age, you are learning what sex is. I talked about this on the podcast somewhat, but like, I feel like I didn't have like an example of marriage. And so that bleeds into sex, that bleeds into love, affection, arguing, everything that goes into a marriage. And so I got it from Hollywood. Yeah. That includes sex. Yeah. So that's not real either. It's not necessarily porn. Maybe now it is. Back then it wasn't. But, like I said, the Titanic. Yeah. There's no man out here painting me. I'll say that. Maybe Israel. We had him on. He said girls ask him to paint her all the time.
Oh, man.
But on that note, her talking about abuse is one thing. Yeah. That I agree with her, that it's extremely normalized and almost expected. Like the disrespect. Yeah. And to the point that women want it. Actually, I have a friend who recently told me, he was like, girls are like asking for this, and like I don't want to do that. I don't want to slap her in the face. Yeah. But that has to come from either watching porn or being with a guy who watched porn that was abusive and then taught her that. That comes from something. But I actually went to a porn website, not Pornhub, as far as I know, it's still shut down. But the top 3 videos that I found were, I cheat on my girlfriend with her pervert twin sister. Stepson took boner pills by mistake and stepmom helps him bring that boner down. Hot, tiny teen stepdaughter with braces and her hot best friend, pleasure stepdad. The women in that video looked like young teenagers. They had braces and pigtails. This came from a site called dadcrushes.com, which is currently shut down. So, just like any addiction, it's progressive.
Yeah.
So, Billie Eilish is talking about, she's somewhere around our age, 20s or something like that. That, for her it was, I think she is a bit younger. For her it was abuse, physical abuse. You mentioned verbal abuse.
Yeah.
But now we're talking incest and pedophilia.
Yep.
I mean, it's one thing, there's all these issues that we've already talked about for why a man wants to go watch porn and then gets addicted to it. Yeah. But now you're talking about grown men who are fathers, dadcrushes.com, that are seeking out porn to get off thinking about little girls, potentially their own children.
Yeah.
And so I have to say, if you're someone who is an advocate for porn, how do you explain this? How do you explain this kind of progression, and where do you draw the line? Are you going to say that it's okay because you think the women in those videos with pigtails are over 18? Yeah. What if they're 19? What if they're 17 and 3/4? I mean, when does it make it okay? Because at the end of the day, the people going and seeking that out have pedophilic tendencies. Yeah. And that's also a progressive disease. Yeah. Starts out on the internet, you end up in jail. Yeah. Hopefully, or dead.
Yeah, I mean,
castrated.
It's I think I can't remember. There was a state that recently just passed a bill that said that they now perpetrators of physical abuse to minors were eligible for capital punishment or castration. They had the choice, but that was their two choices that they got. And it goes back to that question of control. And again, how could someone advocate for this? Well, because they think that it's something that at the end of the day can be controlled, can be contained, right? Mm. And now we're talking not just individually, but societally, right? Right. Culturally speaking, we think that this is something that we can just maneuver, right? The slippery slope is just a logical fallacy. That never is true. And I would argue, actually, you read history, it's
always true.
It's always true. It's always true.
It's something my dad harps on. Is the slippery slope idea.
Yeah, and I think if you're honest about your indulgences, look, let's talk about food for a second, right? Okay. Why do we need to work out? Why do we need to diet? To not necessarily to look good, but just simply to live a healthy lifestyle, right? Mm-hmm. Because the slippery slope is you slip into binge eating, even binge eating good food. It's not good for you physically. Right. Likewise with pornography, you start at this level and you realize that chemically speaking, you start to just sort of numb out your sensors of
pleasure centers.
Yeah. And so your body then craves, I want more of that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, talk to people who smoke weed, right? Like people who smoke weed. From the first time you smoke weed to when you quit, how did your usage go? It probably went like that. Right? And I talked to a friend of mine that, again, is not a Christian, but like he will say the same thing, So it's just something that is purely found in human nature, but this is where I would say it's backed by what you read about sin in the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. And it's always the matter of it keeps you longer than you want to stay. It's going to cost you more than you want to pay, Yeah. And so that is always the case. And when these things get out of control, right, which we're seeing right now societally, I mean, like, I correct if I'm wrong, but I think that there are now advocacy groups for even...
I'm sure they are, and I'm sure they're going to find a place on the flag.
So it's one of those things that it's
they don't already have one. Add another color. I think we might be out of colors, but...
So it's one of those things that it's like, look, like this absolutely has a measurable, recordable degradation that we're seeing, mm-hmm. right? And again, you don't need... People always reel of it because like they're like, oh, you're coming from it from a religious perspective. I'm actually not. I'm actually coming from a very empirical, practical perspective here, mm-hmm. and just saying, look at the data.
Well, and what you're doing is what I'm perceiving that you're doing is you're lining up the actual facts with what the Bible says, and they happen to be the same. They happen to be in line with each other.
Yeah.
So people can do with that information what they want. But you're not saying it's bad because the Bible says it's bad. That just so happens to also be true.
Right.
Do you think that porn is a drug?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, chemically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
it acts the same way as a drug. It packs a more potent punch than most drugs out there, honestly. But it's one of the most accessible drugs that we have on the market. Right?
It has to be the most, aside from maybe food. Although food costs money.
Food
Porn,
costs money.
if you have a phone that you've already purchased,
Yeah.
doesn't cost you anything
Yeah.
financially.
And, we're talking about, the United States here, right? But, like, globally speaking, I mean, I think I was reading that the porn industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's, I don't know if you saw that there was like a video too that went viral, I think, of some undercover reporters went into, like, I don't remember which porn site it was, but they went into, like, their, like, main admin buildings and they were asking about, hey, like, the age verification thing of, like, the actors. And the guy was like, I mean, like, we try to, but, like, sometimes so his answer was very much like, we're not always even fully in control that, like, what you're viewing isn't, like, minors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, for me,
That's what I was saying about that video.
Yeah.
I wrote in my notes they looked like teenagers.
Yeah.
The video didn't say they weren't.
Yeah. And the reason why I bring that up is, why it's a drug. Well, I mean, let's talk about, like, the lacing of drugs with, like, fentanyl, right? It's the same thing. It's like, oh man, like, they're selling you that it's someone that's of legal age and safe to look at.
Right.
But you don't know if you're secretly programming yourself to start looking at minors that way.
Absolutely.
And you have zero control over that because you
minors
have zero...
or family members
Yeah.
or things that you wouldn't have normally sought after.
Yeah. And you have zero control because you control zero of the supply. Zero supply. You're only a consumer.
And those videos that I read, I wasn't, like, deep diving on these websites. I was trying to get in and out as quick as possible. They were front page,
Yeah.
first 3 options.
Yeah.
So that means they're being consumed the most.
Yeah.
That's any basic algorithm knowledge.
Yeah. But can I just point us also to look at what's been happening recently in Hollywood with the infestation of pedophilia and
minor
sexual
attracted
abuse.
persons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, like, man, like, that is so ingrained into our culture. This is why there's no red flag being waved on this, because at every level this is being accepted.
Right.
And it's really sad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, you talked about earlier how biblical facts line up with reality, and I would even add on to say that it's like biblical facts point to reality, right? And I would say that
they point to the truth.
They point to the truth. And you go back and read like Romans 1, right? And look at how it's describing a society, and you look at the American culture today and tell me, does it not line up?
Right.
Yep.
So I remember I was like a teenager, maybe around 18 or so, and I was a Christian, pretty new, but I didn't know what I believed when it came to sexuality, because I was so confused.
Yeah.
And I went to Romans 1. I don't know how I got there, but somehow I did. And I was like, oh, well, just lays it out right here.
Yeah.
This tells you exactly what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And it tells you what happened to that society that was living in that sexual sin, which included a lot of pedophilia.
Yeah.
I asked you, do you think porn is a drug? And the latest version of the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the DSM-5, has added internet gaming disorder as a mental disorder. Internet porn, which is not in the DSM, has been shown in studies to be more addictive than internet gaming. I mean, I feel like internet gaming is extremely addictive.
Yeah.
I mean, you see people, that's their whole life. You can spot one a mile away. Somebody who's.
I personally don't game, but like I know people that do, and it's like it is something on their calendar.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, as a kid, had certain games that I was addicted to. I mean, like I would stay up all night playing. Like I had short stints of that. It would normally be like over summer when there's like nothing to do, but I think it's very The Sims. The Sims and Tomb Raider.
Oh man, I mean those are classics though. I mean those are awesome.
They are, but they are extremely addictive, especially Tomb Raider because it is so hard to get to the next level.
Yeah.
Especially back then when you've got like 2 buttons.
They really made you work in my buddy and I would stay up and play like NHL hits or whatever, and like we'd play a whole season, which is like 82 games I think or something, in one night. We'd stay up from like 10 to like 6 in the morning, and then like you think about today, it's like, can you function without like 8 hours of sleep? Like I feel like I'm dead.
No, absolutely not. I won't function well. Section 3 of the DSM-5, which is conditions for further study. So those are usually things that they are going to have more clarity on in the next version of the DSM. But that does include caffeine use disorder and internet gaming disorder. So they're kind of like prefacing that for the next version, which I'm like, I definitely fall into the caffeine use.
I'll say, what is it about the caffeine order? Because I'll be honest, this week I've started weaning myself off from caffeine. I've been drinking more decaf.
Okay.
And I've had a lingering headache the last 2 days.
Oh, yeah. So do you think that there's an argument that porn could be good for the user's quality of life?
So I'm going to try to give some grace on this answer and run with it, where I think the advocacy would be for it, right? Which is usually around, well, it'll spice up the living room, or the living room, spice up the bedroom.
Or the living room?
I don't know. I don't know where you get down with it, but okay, I hear that, right? I hear that. And that's where I assume this usually comes from. I could be wrong. I would say that there are things that are perhaps sparks in the immediate moment, but they're not sustainable. And at the end of the day, anything that is going to be good for a relationship is something that's sustainable. At the end of the day, to you and your partner, if you're using porn together, I think statistically it shows that it doesn't typically pan out very well for you, simply because you have two people reacting to a reality, and what you're actually doing is you're addicting yourself to variety. And addicting yourself to variety goes against the face of marriage entirely. So I don't see, in my own opinion, how if I start to view porn with my partner, how that's going to make me pursue them more, or am I just actually pursuing the overall environment of pursuing porn together?
Right. I think that the only way, if you're talking within a marriage or a relationship, I think the only way that you can argue that it's good is if you believe that sex and love are separate.
Right.
If you believe that those are two things that are not intertwined and that you can separate mentally, physically, emotionally, then if you're both in agreement, why not? But I just don't think that that's true.
But let me ask you about that. If sex and love are separate, then why is cheating an issue in a relationship?
In that person's mind, I don't think it would be. Those people probably are very open. Or swingers, or there was a couple on the Ashley Madison documentary who they were like the couple that was interviewed that felt like they had a good outcome from the website, and she's a dominatrix. He likes to have sex with other women, so he's like the user on Ashley Madison, which still exists, by the way. And so he would like meet someone on the website, and then everything was consensual between him and his wife. So then he would ask her like, oh, can I bring this girl home tonight? And the wife would say yes. And I think sometimes it would be an interaction with all three of them. I think sometimes maybe it would be just them two. That wasn't clear, but they strongly believed that sex and love were separate, and that this whole fluid aspect of their relationship was benefiting it because it gave them each individually like more sexual freedom. But I just don't really, I don't see that. I do think that Actually, if people go back and watch the episode with the Stanleys, What Makes a Man Fall in Love, he actually talks about how he gets that satisfaction of variety in his wife. So they've been married for like 15 years. And there's a part where he talks about how seeing her through different seasons of life, he wasn't talking sexually, but he was describing how it makes the relationship deepen and it makes you kind of like fall in love over and over again, because you're seeing her basically blossom into like a new person over and over and over again with all of these different seasons of life. So that's probably like a healthy variety. That and whatever the two of you do consent to within the bounds of your marriage. I mean, there's sky's the limit. You don't have to include other people in that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point that they made there. Honestly, it reminds me of there's a song by the Oh Hellos called "Like the Dawn," and it's a poetic description of Adam's first view of Eve when she came out to the scene. That he said she was beautiful like the dawn, and that reminded me of like, you know, you can view. I mean, I know most people, probably not morning people, but I think that sunrises and sunsets are incredibly beautiful, right? And you can see a sunrise from many different vantage points, from the beach, from plains, from the mountains, right? You're seeing the same beauty, but in different settings. And I think that's that variety that he's talking about. It's like different seasons, but it's the same sunrise I'm looking at, right? And I think when you're letting other things encroach on that, I mean, you're no longer really appreciating the full beauty in its pure essence. You're kind of like complimenting it. I'm like, well, this is the sunrise, but like, you know, actually, like, I kind of want the sky to be more purple. And I actually want the sun to be a little bit smaller. Even though I know that's not what it is, but in my mind, when I'm, you know, having sex with her or like just being like emotionally like intimate with her or anything, I'm adding things to her that aren't there, you know? And I would go back and say, look, like, I believe that there are that very like small percentage of couples that do that and somehow make it work. I would just say that again, I don't think the exception generally is a good logic for the rule, right? I would not encourage that on the average. In fact, I would encourage the opposite, right? Monogamy, but I would not be loving my neighbor well, encouraging them to partake in that behavior.
Right. On the note of the quality of life, this is what some of the stats said. This came from Bespoke Surgical. 69% of Americans say they've experienced guilt or shame after watching porn. Yet 62% also say porn is a huge stress reliever. Time magazine said 68.3% of women aren't bothered by male partners' porn watching habits as long as they don't interfere with the relationship. To me, that's a huge oxymoron, but okay.
I would wonder how could they further elaborate on how it doesn't interfere with the relationship? I'd be really curious to have them elaborate on that.
Right.
Because
that doesn't make sense to me.
It spills over everywhere in a relationship.
Yeah. Well, and it just quite literally, they're taking time away from you to go watch porn. That's interfering with a relationship.
Right.
That's probably less sex for you. Medscape said a study revealed that the 9.3% of young men admitted to watching porn 6 times or more per week. Of those who view porn that often, a third say they prefer it over sex with a woman. That's really sad.
They preferred over sex with a woman.
So that's about what says 9% of men who admitted, a third of those, so you're talking 3%.
That's interesting. I mean, again, that's a small number, but like, there's a reason why, right? Like, see, when I hear that statistic, I don't think like, wow, that person is like a degenerate. I think that person is incredibly insecure. Like, there is something that is causing them to flee from normal human interaction at the end of the day. And that's where You know, I think a lot of times, this is why I said, hey, like read the book of Job, right? Because those are those conversations where like you can approach it in a way of hastiness, efficiency, like let's get to the solution, get over yourself, fix yourself up, you know, or you can say, hey, I'm here to get down to the root cause of this, right? But when you sit there and you get down to the root cause with that individual, they're going to notice that, and there's respect gained there. You know, there's certainly respect gained there. You got to see where they're really coming from. That's what I've learned about porn, is that porn is really a symptom. It's really a symptom of something else. In every person's life, it's always a symptom of something. And I don't say this because of what I've researched, but also simply the other guys that I've talked to that have openly shared about their experiences. Like, there is always I was X, therefore porn became the Y, you know? So it's there. That's
what are some examples of that?
So
I think you mentioned singleness, but other than that,
yeah. So let me say, like, also I think definitely stress for men, whether it's job, whether it's familial stress, whether it's you know, I think too a lack of self-esteem, right? If a guy doesn't really like how he looks, he may be like, well, like, no girl is gonna really be attracted to me, but like, I don't need a girl to get off. I'll just go on the internet and satiate myself. And now you have, you know, like artificial intelligence chatbots that impersonate a girl, and you have an online girlfriend, and
that's so creepy.
yeah, and I mean now too. I mean it's I didn't want to deep dive into AI because I feel like that should be a whole nother segment. But like, let's just say that the advances of AI are far surpassing the limits of human imagination right now. And it's a scary point to be at, because it's essentially what I would say are God-given barriers in our imagination. We're being pulled out beyond those things, and we're being exposed to new things that, look, we just don't have research to understand how these are impacting us. I think our millennial generation is going to go down in the textbooks way down the road as the generation that was sucked into the screens. And we're going to be a case study of why that's not healthy. Now you're seeing a lot of Gen Zs are kind of turning away against social media, right? And dumping that stuff because, well, they're looking at how messed up we are, you know?
Man.
So
that sucks. But you're right.
Yeah.
In your opinion, do you think porn is degrading to women? Is it degrading to men?
Yeah. Well, I would say yes, definitely to both, right? Because from a Christian perspective, I always like to start there. I think that's where you need to start when it comes to the value of human life, right? You're created in the image of God. I am created in the image of God. God condemns strongly out of more sins than not sexual sin, right? Because I think it's the one that is most physically close and damaging to the very creation in which he stamped his image on, right?
1 Corinthians 6:18, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body.
Yeah. And especially when you view another individual, it's like that person was, I know it's, you know, a verse has become cliche, but beautifully and wonderfully made. And I kind of wish it wasn't a cliche, because really that's so beautiful to say about someone. I mean, like the fact that we have a loving God that views us that way, but we're not loving our neighbor well when we don't view them the way that God views them, right? It's Jesus boiled down the commandments to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and in that same love you love your neighbor as well too. So if you don't have a degrading love towards God, then you can't have a degrading love towards your neighbor. And that means that you can't objectify your neighbor, right? This is why one of the 10 commandments is you shouldn't covet your neighbor's wife, right? And I think one of the things that gets missed there is because what are you doing when you're coveting something? is you're reducing its value to something of merely something to purchase or something to steal, right? And that's sex trafficking, you know? Like, you want to talk about there.
Yeah.
You're seriously bring down the value of an individual to a price and a commodity in a market. I mean, that's disgusting to bring someone down to that level, because I'm sorry, do you want to be labeled that way? I don't.
Right.
So, and
there is a lot of sex trafficking in the porn industry.
Exactly.
A lot.
And you don't know which one it is. So I think that, you know, for those reasons, I would say that it is degrading, right? And I try not to make these claims from a like moral high ground, right? That it's but it's merely the fact that it's like, look, like if you boil down what real love is, like you wouldn't treat someone that way. I don't think you would, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, would you want your wife to do that, to be a porn star? Would you want your daughter, your sister, your friend?
Yeah.
You know, I think most people would say no, but yet you're okay with it when it's someone else's daughter,
Right.
someone else's sister,
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
And I think some people would argue that it's not degrading because the porn stars are choosing that, allegedly choosing that.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe that they all are actively choosing that. But I would argue that that doesn't make it not degrading.
Right.
I mean, are there ever things that people do that are degrading to themselves? What about a drug addict? Does that mean that it's not degrading to themselves because they're choosing to do it?
Yeah.
No, something's making them do that.
Yeah.
Something in, like we're talking about, internal struggle. If you're a heroin addict on the streets, you're clearly degrading your own self, but most reasonable people would say that something's causing that person to put themselves in that position.
Right.
Something that's not good.
Yeah, I think that it helps always to define, like, well, what do we mean when we say like degrading, right? And I think it's in most literal sense, it's like it's a sabotaging of reputation. I think that's what ultimately degrading behavior is. So people can choose to partake in degrading things,
Right.
you know, and again, it's like by them choosing that, they're assigning a degrading image on themselves. I would say, like, just, you know, you go to a bar and the guy that's like belligerently drunk, right? You know, you would say that he's probably involved in some degrading behavior by what he's saying or what he's doing, right? And that's where you know, like it's you can, simply because you consent to a career that is degrading doesn't mean that all of a sudden it stops being degrading.
Right.
It's more just kind of like you just kind of stepped in line and agreed to that, you know?
Right.
I think that you also are so much more than that.
Who's that pastor that used to be a porn star? I was listening to him on a podcast too. Joshua Broom.
Joshua Broom. I feel like I've heard the name before.
Joshua Broom. So I'll link that podcast. I'll find it and link it so that y'all can listen to it. But yeah, from porn star to pastor is like what some of the headlines say about him.
There's a really good book that I've read, or partially read. I lent it out to some friends. It actually was a couple, and it's kind of funny because, like...
Is it Love Thy Body?
No.
Oh, that's a good one too.
It's Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and it talks about, in a more general sense, like the sexual ethic and how it plays into like culture and things like that. And we're all relational beings in a sense. In other words, why is that the case? Because how we define our identity has everything to do with the relationships that we have, right? So, for example, if you were to say, okay, like, you know, I am Alex. I am an employer of X company. I'm a brother and a son of X family. You know, like, that is how you identify yourself. You know, asked me earlier, like, oh, where are you from? I'm a Canadian. I'm a Mexican. You know, like, everything that goes into your identity always roots back to the relationships that you have, right?
Right.
And that's where I wonder how these people got there, because we all crave identity. There's two things in this life that we all fundamentally crave, is identity and relationship, right?
Well, that's one of the basic needs on the hierarchy of needs, is a sense of self.
Yeah. And and this kind of goes back to, I think, like, the more we also research this topic about these individuals, I think it should also develop more empathy in us too towards them, because the question is, what made them go there? Why did they choose to go there? Where did they come from? I think the reality is that, you know, the chances are probably most of them went out of there because they were seeking to participate or belong to something. And that was what was made available, right? And I think that, you know, the Christian message there is that you are so much more than your career, you're so much more than your sexual desires. Like, you are made complete in Christ, right? And here I want to tie it back in with the secured earned attachment, right? Because where do you find, why do I pull in Christ here? Because Christ is the model. When you read the Gospels, Christ is the model for what a healthy relationship looks like between other people who did not believe in him, his closest friends, and God. Like, the crux of perfect relationships all comes back into Christ, because he did it perfectly.
That cornerstone.
It's a cornerstone. And so that's where I think people need to start looking at, okay, how do I view relationships? And how does Christ enter into these relationships? And where's the mismatch? Because that's when you can really start evaluating yourself. Because through that relationship, you're also feeding into your identity. And you have to realize, is my identity really rooted in something healthy? Or is it rooted in an unhealthy relationship to something?
Right.
And for men, that's the answer that they have to come to grips with porn. Do I have an unhealthy relationship with porn? And as a result, is it causing an unhealthy identity crisis in me? And because of me having an unhealthy identity crisis, I am now an unstable individual, and that instability now affects my
everything
dating,
else,
my partner.
Yeah.
So it absolutely overflows everywhere.
Yeah. And even to tie in with relationships, you know, when we're talking about like the degrading behaviors, if you agree, like, yes, pornography is degrading to women or degrading to the actors, well, you consuming that is enabling that behavior. Right. So everybody knows you don't give money to a drug addict. Yeah. You cut off the guy at the bar who's too drunk.
Right.
You don't give alcohol to an alcoholic. I mean, most people with any sense of morale knows that that is enabling and that hurts the person on the other end. Yeah. So if you see those people in those films as real people, then you have to recognize that you are enabling that behavior. And I think especially, well, it goes both ways, but especially from a man to a woman porn star and from a woman to a woman porn star. Yeah. That is like, you can't get any lower. You are, there's something to me that's very sacred about women supporting women. I know that sounds like very feminist, it's not, but you know, I can't sit there and watch a woman do this, especially when you're talking that just really perverted, really disgusting acting out this pedophilia and abuse. And I mean, it's just, you know, at some point you have to sit down with yourself and you have to say, do I think that this is okay? If I don't think this is okay, if I don't want to do it and I don't want my children doing it, why am I enabling it? Why am I consuming it? Yeah. And for the men, it's an even higher calling, because what you enable, what you consume, what you approve of, you're setting that precedent for the entire culture. Not just yourself, not just your spouse, not just your family, the culture. Yeah. Because our culture is founded on men. Yeah. That's the way it's supposed to be, yeah. Whether we like it or not. Yep. And men not only consuming that content, but participating in it, producing it, advocating for it, selling it. Yeah. I mean, then it's like, when you look at it that way, it's like, no wonder there's pedophiles everywhere. The men have set no boundaries.
They're selling a false sense of sexual freedom to women.
Yes.
Because like, you get to go on this and act and do whatever you want, and guess what? You're the main star of the show. But you're actually our puppet.
You're also disposable.
You are.
Nobody in that room loves you.
Yeah.
Nobody actually wants you there.
Yeah.
You know, you can be replaced at any moment in time.
It's a very dark industry, honestly. I think that it's the reason why it's successful again is the lack of, because it's so unpopular to say right now, to say even something like, hey, I think porn should be illegal. Like, can you imagine saying that? Like, you know, and I know that
Well, we are in Texas.
That's gonna ruffle feathers, I know, and I'm not here to advocate and make that statement necessarily, but like, I'm just saying, like, the fact that is outlandish, but we're sitting here and talking about how detrimental it is, and we even asked, hey, is porn a drug? Because it sure looks like one.
Right. I mean, heroin's illegal.
Yeah.
Public intoxication is illegal.
And I'm just saying, I'm like, look, why aren't we bearing the same weight on this addictive substance that's being consumed at a young age and destroying the minds of our kids? Like, when you frame it that way, all of a sudden it doesn't seem so crazy to say, yeah, maybe this thing
Take yourself out of the equation.
Yeah.
Take you getting your nut out of the equation for 5 seconds and look at the big picture.
Yeah.
I want to, on that note, read, because you know, the whole Texas, at least, I don't know if this is going on in any other states, but they are trying to put stricter boundaries on porn websites.
Age verification thing, I think, right?
Yeah.
About that.
To have access to the website. So this is what Pornhub says. It says, "Dear user," it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it.
Okay.
"As you may know, your elected officials in Texas are requiring us to verify your age before allowing you access to our website. Not only does this impinge on the rights of adults to access protected speech, it fails strict scrutiny by employing the least effective and yet also the most restrictive means of accomplishing Texas' stated purpose of allegedly protecting minors. While safety and compliance are at the forefront of our mission," it's hilarious, "providing identification every time you want to visit an adult platform is not an effective solution for protecting users online, and in fact will put minors and your privacy at risk. Attempting to mandate age verification without any means to enforce at scale gives platforms the choice to comply or not, leaving hundreds of thousands of websites open and accessible. As we've seen in other states, such bills have failed to protect minors by driving users from these few websites which comply to the hundreds of thousands of websites with far fewer safety measures in place which do not comply. Very few sites are able to compare to the robust trust and safety measures we currently have in place. To protect minors and user privacy, any legislation must be enforced against all platforms offering adult content. Unfortunately, the Texas law for age verification is ineffective, haphazard, and dangerous. Not only will it not actually protect children, but it will also inevitably reduce content creators' ability to post and distribute legal adult content and directly impact their ability to share the artistic messages they want to convey with it. The safety of our users is one of our biggest concerns." We should tell them to watch
Are you sure it's not the bottom line?
We should tell them to watch. Yeah, we should tell them to watch the episode. "We believe that the only effective solution for protecting minors and adults alike is to verify users' age on their device and to either deny or allow access to age-restricted materials and websites based on that verification. We call on all..." How does that make any sense? On a device? Anyone could get on any device. "We call on all adult sites to comply with the law. Until the real solution is offered, we have made the difficult decision to completely disable access to our website in Texas. In doing so, we're complying with the law as we always do, but hope that governments around the world will implement laws that actually protect the safety and security of users." I hope they do too.
Why would governments around the world need to have any bearing on what Texas does?
I don't know.
If it's
This is the most gaslighting thing I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, yeah, to be honest, because it's all about protecting you and protecting our content creators.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny because beer ads, cigarette ads, they all say drink responsibly, or smoking may cause cancer. I don't ever see a view responsibly. ticker on a porn site.
That's very true.
So if they're so concerned about...
Even on pharmaceuticals, they read off the side effects.
Yeah. So they're being intellectually dishonest by saying that, no, it's, well, first off, protected speech. I mean, that, I even kind of laugh at that.
Yeah.
To be kind of completely honest, because it's like, you know, okay. Content creators and all that, sure. But it's like they're producing a product, though, that you know that it's documented in science that is bad for you.
Right.
And you don't even stick a warning label on it.
Right.
You know, when you look at the statistics, like, and I saw this, as you get older, viewership of pornography does start to decline in older men. Actually, I think in seniors it's only like a quarter. I think if I remember correctly, the stats are higher in, you know, younger, like preteens, teens, and young adults, right? And that legislation just cut off a huge market from them. So of course they're upset, right?
Right.
But here's the thing, it's never, and I hate when just people, companies, it's like, it's for the benefit of the consumer. It's like, no. It's for the benefit of your bottom dollar, or your bottom line, right, at the end of the day. And to me, I agree with you. It's incredibly gaslighting and just intellectually dishonest and inconsistent.
I could have at least respect for their argument if it was logical. So if they're saying like, hey, if they're just arguing like how to age verify or whether or not they think you should age verify, fine. But yeah, to gaslight and say that we care about you and that this law will hurt you and it's all about our content creators, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Anybody with half a brain cell knows that that's bullshit.
Yeah.
This is a business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would ask the average guy, if you don't go to a porn site, if you don't masturbate, are you going to die? Probably not. You may feel like you're going to explode, but like the reality is you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So again, like what health are they trying to protect you or like benefit you? Like nothing. There's nothing healthy about that.
Yeah.
It's like a cigarette company being like, "Hey, we want you to access our cigarettes freely because we care about your health." It's like, no, you don't. The very product that you sell me is bad for me.
Yeah.
You don't care about my health. You care about my money, or you care about my viewership, which turns into money. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense.
I want to end this conversation kind of going into what you just pointed out of like the health consequences with some more studies that are a little bit more comprehensive. Yeah. So again, it's really hard to find any studies or statistics that paint a positive picture of porn. So I went to college, I studied science, I studied psychology. I know how to find peer-reviewed studies. Mm-hmm. And I was digging and there were none, because things that are not factual don't get peer-reviewed. So if somebody does have that information, I would be very interested to read it. Yeah. Send it to me. A 2016 Canadian study reported 45.3% of adolescents admitted problems with erectile dysfunction. A 2014 study in Germany found a significant negative association between reported pornography hours per week and gray matter volume in the right caudate, as well as with functional activity during a sexual cue reactivity paradigm in the left putamen. So what does this mean? What is a negative association? That means when one goes up, the other one goes down. So they're saying there's a negative association between the hours of porn watched per week and gray matter volume in the brain. So the more porn you watch, the less gray matter you have in your brain. What is gray matter? According to the Cleveland Clinic definition, gray matter is a type of tissue in your brain and spinal cord, so part of your central nervous system, that plays a crucial role in allowing you to function normally from day to day. Gray matter is where information processing happens. It is the seat of a human's unique ability to think and reason. It is the place where the processing of sensation, perception, voluntary movement, learning, speech, and cognition takes place, controls movement, memory, and emotions. So What does that mean? A study from Brigham Young University found that pornography users have been shown to decrease that pornography use has been shown to decrease the gray matter of the prefrontal cortex compared to baseline, thereby decreasing decision making. This effect to the cortices dedicated to decision making and self-control may contribute to why pornography use can be addictive. So the consequences, the physical consequences in and of itself of watching porn consistently basically set you up to become addicted to it.
Yeah.
I don't know of any drug like that. And not only that, but it's decreasing your overall functioning as a human being.
Yeah.
I mean, your decision making, emotions, learning, speech, cognition. I mean, it's essentially turning you into a blob.
I mean, you know, again, like, it's no surprise, right, that like when we mess with like our strongest like natural instinct, right, chemically speaking, we start throwing around the chemicals around our brain, it's going to have just drastic impacts just across the board, and that's kind of where it's an unrealized pain, I think, that a lot of times comes down the road.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the erectile dysfunction thing. That's
in teens.
Yeah.
The majority, or 45%. That was in 2016.
And I'll tell you that in like the manosphere, right, you know, in the male side of things, that's kind of viewed as like a myth.
It's not.
It's not. It's not. But like,
I'll tell you right now, it's not.
But it's the stigma that is in the male side of things, that's how we play it. I was like, oh, that'll never happen to me. That's like the minority percent.
No. Why do you think Blue Chew is doing so well?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And why do you think that they're plastered all over those porn sites?
Yeah.
As advertisements. And
exactly. That's good marketing.
I mean, it's also the level of stimulus that we receive today versus like what like our parents had to deal with, where it was
right.
just magazines, right? And it was not.
It
such
was
variety.
hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, exactly. You had to know.
That, like, if you look at the progression of Playboy.
Yeah.
I watched the whole documentary. I love documentaries. On Playboy as well, like last year sometime. Absolutely fascinating. And you talk about the progression of like sexual perversion. Hugh Hefner was a monster.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that he was doing, like literally up until towards the end of his life, like bestiality and all kinds of abuse to the women. And I mean, just drugging people. He had no limits whatsoever. And even if you just look at the magazine itself from the beginning, where like I don't even think they had their clothes off from the waist down, like that.
Yeah.
They only showed topless, and to the progression of just full spread on every page.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is just a degradation. The last point I had was the negative association of self-reported pornography consumption with the right striatum volume, left striatum activation during cue reactivity, and lower functional connectivity of the right caudate to the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex could reflect change in neural plasticity as a consequence of an intense stimulation to the reward system. So what is neural plasticity? That's the brain's ability to change and adapt due to experience. Together with a lower top-down modulation of prefrontal cortex areas, alternatively, it could be a precondition that makes pornography consumption more rewarding. So that's kind of what I was hitting on earlier about that reward pathway.
Yeah.
That you are wiring your brain to prefer this over that, which is a huge cause for the erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
You literally don't have the ability to be turned on by the person that you maybe love because you have wired your brain to prefer this.
Yeah.
That's really sad. And what are the long-term effects of that? I don't think we really know. I think you were saying earlier, like, porn is not something that you just like stop and never go back to.
Yeah.
Just like any other addiction, it's something that you have to actively not seek it out, if I'm not wrong. I don't think that reward pathway really ever goes away.
It doesn't, because it's naturally a healthy reward pathway. Like naturally that pathway should be craving like sexual intimacy with a person.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying, you sort of hijacked it and conditioned it to crave variety, craving
Right.
porn.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there is like good news is that like it's not where a lot of other drugs I think have like a very sometimes like a very like visible like long-term effect, right? You know, I see guys that like, you know, they've done, I don't know, like heroin or some hard drugs that they're just like not all like they're not all there.
Right.
I think porn recovery is something that is a hope for people who want to get out of it, and it can really I've heard testimonies of people that have come out of that addiction and can still lead a very healthy like sexual lifestyle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So fortunately it's all not doom and gloom, but it really goes back to the biggest hurdle with any addiction, right, is the first step, which is admitting that you're addicted.
Yeah.
Right. And I think too, especially in your relationship, because we're talking about relationships here, it's the close second is being vulnerable about that, right? One of the biggest detriments that I've seen with men that try to battle porn is that they do it alone, and that is a losing battle.
Yeah.
You gotta surround yourself with some quality men that will keep you accountable. I mean, like, you know, I like, thank God, like that's not like something that I'm like wrestling with or anything, but like I told you, I have covenant eyes in my phone because I know that temptation though, it can pop up whenever. Like the devil walks around like a prowling lion, waiting to devour you, right? And it's something that I read a book a couple years ago by a gentleman named Steve Farrar called Point Man, and it's about leadership of stewarding like a family well. And he made a really good point. He's like, in the future, like God gives you the family and he gives you a marriage, right? And he gives you things that are good. And the enemy wants to dismantle everything that is good. So you don't think as a man that just because you become married that now all of a sudden you can drop your guard against sexual temptation.
Right.
He's like, it'll actually probably increase. It'll probably get harder.
Wow.
Because there is that temptation. So there's two things that you as a man cannot stop doing, right? And he said, you know, scripture and prayer. And I would add on to that a third one, community. I think that you as a man, when you struggle with this stuff,
and women too,
right? Do not hide your shame, because that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do. You go back to the garden, right? And what Adam and Eve is that they hid their shame, right? And it's always been a thing that it's like they hid their shame from the only being that could do something about their brokenness. And that's kind of how I think a lot of times porn is viewed in the men's perspective. Is like, I don't want to bring this out to the air because what will it do to my reputation? It's going to destroy me. People will think less of me.
right?
And I'll tell you that is a lie. That is absolutely a lie. I think you'll find that more people will respect you for being honest about that struggle, because I think more people struggle with it than you would imagine. So I think that there's a lot of encouragement that I can give that I wouldn't give lightly. I'd give it from personal experience of bringing that stuff out to the light, finding a trusted person to lay that down with, and saying, hey, like, these are the things I don't want this to destroy. And one of those things is future relationships. I don't want it to destroy my marriage. I think we brought off a statistic that it's like it certainly has an impact on divorces.
Right, more than half.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Covenant Eyes. I'm going to link Covenant Eyes as well as some other resources, podcasts, and things like that y'all can listen to, look at, read, just consume kind of some more information. But otherwise, do you have any last closing remarks?
Well, I will just say that, you know, again, there is freedom in bringing out your secrets to the right people and to the light. And I'm not saying you got to air out your dirty laundry to everyone, but from personal experience, I'll just tell you that that there is freedom, that you're not chained to this. And if you are someone, man or woman, that's struggling with this, find trusted people to start talking to this about, because it's better for you to resolve it sooner than later, you know. But and I would just say, I wouldn't be doing it justice, but it's like the very first person you run to is Christ. That is the first person you run to with this. And from my own experience, that's been the best way to resolve it. But other than that, I mean, I think that Natalie, what you're doing with this podcast is great, and thanks for having me on this and having this conversation. I hope it helped. And complaint boxes are not on my side.
I'm sure we'll have some complaints. One thing that you just brought to my mind, there's another podcast which I'll link, which has Jonathan Pokluda. How do you say his last name? Pokluda. From Waco. He's a pastor there. Yeah. And he has an incredible story as well. He didn't used to be a porn star, but he did have a porn addiction and was actively watching porn even going into his marriage as a Christian. And he mentioned something on the podcast about, like, there are some sins that can only be resolved and you can only come to true repentance over through verbal confession and the prayer of a righteous man. There are some things, and I think sexual sin is one of those things. That's even something that I have experienced. There is a physical, spiritual lifting of a burden over some sin, especially sin that has a very deep stronghold, which could even be generational, and or rooted in trauma, that can only be resolved through confession. This is James 5:16. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. So it lays it out right there that there is a calling to confess and pray. And I think this is one of those things, especially when it's something that's deeply ingrained in culture. It's all around us. It's something that the enemy is absolutely using to control families, to control marriage. I mean, to control, like you said, everything that's good, and to destroy it, not just control it. So you have to have the power of each other, the power of prayer, the power of righteous man. Like you said, you cannot do that. You cannot overcome a sin like this alone. You can't just like clench your fists and hope that it goes away. So just another little nugget. I'll link that podcast as well. Thank you, Alex.
All right.
Good job.
All right.
Yes, that's what he said.
That's what he said.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode of That's What He Said. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you're taking away something valuable that will benefit your dating life. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give this show a follow, rate, and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like this video, and most importantly, comment below, because I want to hear what you said. See you next time.